This is Ed Lawrence, Director of Research with Colliers here in Pittsburgh. This is our first quarter 2024 interview for our newsletters. And I'm sitting here today with Mark Hauser, author and speaker. And we're going to have a discussion about a couple of books that he has worked on and also what he does on the lecture circuit as well. So we're thrilled to have Mark here with us this morning. Mark, maybe just to start out at a high level in terms of your background and your inspiration for what you do, can you share with us what inspired your journey to become an author and speaker and provide as much background as you like in the process?
Sure, thanks. And thank you, Ed, for having me on your podcast.
Yeah,
I appreciate
pleasure.
it.
You bet.
It's nice to be able to talk to Colliers about skyscrapers.
Yes, definitely.
So that's my field. I write and speak about skyscrapers, particularly antique skyscrapers, as I like to call them.
Right.
And that's skyscrapers from the very beginning, in the first ones to be built here in America, because skyscrapers are as American as apple pie.
Right.
All right. They were invented here, they were developed here in the late 1800s. So why do I write about them? Well, I like writing and talking about Pittsburgh stuff. I'm a native Pittsburgher. And some years ago I was looking for an interesting new topic and something we could be proud of. And I found out from the Pittsburgh History and Landmark Foundation that Pittsburgh has 7 skyscrapers designed by Daniel Burnham.
Okay.
Now, this is a great Chicago architect from the late 1800s, and he was the person who arranged or organized the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, the Great Columbian Exposition,
Yeah.
where Pittsburgher George Ferris debuted his Ferris wheel, among other things.
Right.
But so Burnham was one of the first, most famous, most popular architects of skyscrapers right when they were developed, in the 1880s, and he is he's the architect of the Flatiron Building in New York City.
Okay.
But Pittsburgh has more Daniel Burnham buildings than New York, or any city, in fact, other than Chicago, which is where Burnham was from. And what does that tell us? Well, around the turn of the century, Pittsburgh had the power and the wealth and the importance that its tycoons were hiring the most famous designer of skyscrapers.
Okay.
And we have, at one time we had, I think, 11 buildings by Daniel Burnham and his firm. We still have 7. It's
That's
a Frick
remarkable.
building.
Yeah.
A Frick building, the Oliver building,
Mhm.
the Pennsylvania Railroad train station that's now residential.
Right.
And I just think that particular fact says so much just in itself, that our city was, a popular place to come and get commissions and work for a major architect, at a time when skyscrapers were these brand new, radical changes to cities across America.
Right, right. No, that's great, and I think we've all heard about stats around, there are more millionaires per capita in Pittsburgh during that time period, again, just based upon all of the industry and really cutting edge technology for that time in the industrial age was right here in our own backyard. And I guess this is just another outcome of that, like you mentioned. So
And that's
great.
Yeah, exactly. And you make a very good point. And Pittsburgh was also producing the steel for these to be made.
Sure.
So I guess I started writing a column for Pittsburgh Magazine called MultiStories,
Okay.
which was the stories of the people behind Pittsburgh's oldest skyscrapers. And then I quickly realized this could make a great book. You could go around the country and look at the same stories from every city in America. So that's
Right.
my first book,
Yeah.
Multi-Stories, and this is 50 American skyscrapers from the very beginning, plus
Okay.
5 bonus international skyscrapers. So showing how this technology started to spread. And each one, because my background, one of the things I used to do is I was a business reporter at the Pittsburgh Trib.
Yeah.
And so I'm familiar with and wanted to share these stories of entrepreneurs and risk takers and tycoons and how they got their fortunes. Because when
Right.
you look at these buildings, it adds to your appreciation to know how they got where they were. What's the story? Why is Carnegie a name we all need to know? But more
Right.
people too. And so that was my first book, 50 American Skyscrapers. The new project is Highrises, Art Deco.
Right.
And that's 100 skyscrapers. Actually, there's 200 of them on the
Wow.
website.
That's aggressive. Yeah, that's
People
a lot
can
of
see
building.
them, and so it's a
Yeah.
combination. I do the writing
Okay.
and research, and Chris Hytha is an artist from Philadelphia. So you can see what he's done is he's flying a drone up the here's some Chicago skyscrapers like the Board of Trade building, and he
Mhm.
flies his drone up the side of the building, takes pictures at each level, stitches them together, gets the Photoshop, the Adobe Illustrator
Right.
going, and makes these gorgeous works of art, and they're all on the website, highrisescollection.com.
Very, very cool.
As-
Is it hard to get permission to fly the drone sometimes in various cities, or I
Uh,
guess you're getting used to the process?
Well,
right?
Chris is
Or
the drone
Chris is,
pilot,
yeah.
and he gets clearance from in advance from the FAA.
Yeah. Okay.
So he already lets them know his flight plan and
Right.
flies really at sunrise or sunset for the light.
Yeah.
And then I go ahead and dig in and find the stories behind these buildings.
That's awesome. And what is your research process like for that?
Oh, good question.
Thank you.
What I really find useful, I mean, there's some online research for sure, just to get the start up.
Yeah.
But really, what I think brings the most richness and conveys the tone of the time is reading newspaper stories from the day when these buildings opened.
Very cool.
So I dig back into archives, and so there's a couple things that gives you. First of all, it gives you sort of the tone and the tenor of the city and the excitement, and what it is that they like most about this building, what excites them when it opens. These are all from the Art Deco era, so the 20s, the Roaring 20s, the
Right.
Jazz Age, when people were looking at these newer skyscrapers that were even taller and somewhat shinier, and
Right,
look
right.
very modern. They still, to our eyes today, look so.
Mhm.
But in addition to that tone of the writing, I also like reading sometimes the speeches given by the executives and so forth. So there's one I really like, if you'll permit me. I just wrote a story about the cotton exchange in Memphis, Tennessee. So we're adding that to our collection. That'll be online, and you can read any of these stories at highrisescollection.com.
Okay.
But the president of the exchange is John Sneed Williams, and he said that his new skyscraper in Memphis was, quote, a structure sublimely beautiful and so enduring that her proud head shall still be thrust sunward, girt in the habiliments of supernal youth, when the pyramids of yon ancient Egyptian Memphis are but a reminiscent glory.
Wow.
So, I mean, sometimes the writing is...
They wrote a little bit differently back then than they do now,
Yeah,
for
so
sure.
It's fun to see that.
That's great. Yeah, no question about it. And in terms of, I guess, all the research that you've done in putting these books together, do you have any stories about, I guess, if you want to call them your adventures and your research and so forth,
Oh.
that stand out the most?
Yes, I mean, for sure. Great question. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so much inspiration and in the stories of the executives and the leaders that commissioned these skyscrapers. Often you hear about architects, and their work is obviously important. But it's sometimes forgotten, the stories of the people that paid to have a building there in the first place.
Right.
And these are in every city, and they're wonderful. One of my favorites is a Pittsburgh one, the Arrett building, which
Yeah.
is at 4th and Wood. And it's been turned into a hotel recently, the Industrialist.
Yeah.
But that was the first column I did for Pittsburgh Magazine about sort of forgotten or lesser known buildings. And so James Arrett was an Irish immigrant, came to Pittsburgh, started a fire insurance business.
Okay.
And one of the properties that he insured was an iron foundry that burned. And so he and some other investors, after the fire, decided they wanted to get into the business. And they did, and developed it, and it turned into one of its biggest products was bathtubs. And so they came up, he and his business partners came up with a way of spraying the enamel white coating in the bathtub, the iron tub,
Yeah.
to make it look very clean and pretty. And
Right.
this is the predecessor company for American Standard.
Okay.
And
Wow.
James Arrett was the bathtub king of Pittsburgh. And I put his building on the front cover of top of my first book,
Yeah.
MultiStories.
Okay.
Because it's such a fun skyscraper in Pittsburgh, and it's one that you walk past and maybe you've always wondered what this building is.
Yeah.
And it's this stripy one.
Right.
Right?
It's a beautiful building, it is.
And but it's easy to sort of
It's
walk
easy,
past and
yeah.
not know much about it because he's
Right.
not Carnegie, he's not Henry Clay Frick.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a native Pittsburgh, and I pride myself on my knowledge of Pittsburgh, as many of my friends would attest to. But I had not heard that story before. Yeah,
Oh,
it's interesting.
It's
yeah.
a fun one, and I mean, so there's great stories. There's
yeah.
stories from all across the country.
Right.
Just like that, people who come up with a new innovation. I mean, a favorite one is Frank Woolworth, the Woolworth Building,
Mhm.
which was once the world's tallest skyscraper in Manhattan. And Frank Woolworth started out on the family potato farm, and he just didn't want to be a potato farmer.
Right.
So bad that he went into. He worked at a dry goods store. He tried to be a salesman, but he was terrible at it.
Right.
But it turned out he was really good at window displays. So that's what he started to realize his talent was in display and arrangement.
Mhm.
And then soon he found another novelty was selling products all at a set price for either a nickel or a dime.
Right.
And that worked so well for him that he went out on his own, started these 5 and dime stores.
Right.
And I mean, that seems pretty modest, but think
Yeah.
about Walmart,
Right.
right? A store that sells things cheaply but makes a profit on every sale and has a lot of traffic.
Right, right.
If you do it well, you can make a lot of money. And he was able to build a skyscraper right at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge in cash, the
Oh.
tallest skyscraper in the world.
Wow.
So, I mean, some of these stories can really sort of relate to us today. These are people going through times
Yeah.
of great technological upheaval and change,
Mhm.
and trying to innovate and trying to leave a legacy.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's going all the way back to Egyptian pharaohs with the pyramids. Leaving a legacy in their mark that is indelible. And I guess these structures, in some ways, are like that as well.
Yes.
I know right here in Pittsburgh, we have an event coming up at the Union Trust Building, which is my personal favorite in Pittsburgh, and just the stories behind Henry Clay Frick and his motivation to want to build that beautiful and glorious, structure.
It's remarkable.
It's fascinating,
Yeah.
really. Yeah.
And I mean, Henry Clay Frick, obviously, and his relationship with Carnegie. There are a whole bunch of stories that one could say about that.
Right, yeah, no question about it. In terms of Pittsburgh's landscape, given your expertise, how do you see Pittsburgh historical architecture contributing to the commercial real estate landscape, I guess, if you will?
That's a great question,
Yeah.
and it also gets to one of the reasons why I've been interested in these old buildings is because I'm not the only one. Lots of people are interested in these buildings, and they're finding through adaptive reuse and conversion, they're getting a second chance or a third chance at usefulness.
Right.
And so I was reading, I think it was in Yardi Matrix, had a study that in 2022, Pittsburgh was in the top 10 cities in America for the number of apartment units converted from originally office buildings.
Okay.
And I think it was just shy of 200 units in 2022. It was the most recent study that I could find.
Right.
And I think we're not always in that top 10 in Pittsburgh,
Mhm.
but this most recent numbers they are. And I mean,
Yeah.
Cleveland, Baltimore, these are other cities
It's
nearby.
a shift, yeah, for sure.
And I think, Colliers has a couple really nice properties that are old skyscrapers in Pittsburgh.
Right, yeah, no, we do represent a number of those types of assets, and I think, again, growing up in Pittsburgh, I'm 53 years old, but growing up, it never really occurred to me that living in the downtown area was more of a central business district.
Mhm.
My father was a lawyer, my grandfather was a lawyer, that's where they went in, and that's where commerce was transacted, to put it that way. Not really an area where you would look to live, but that has changed and shifted so much over the last 10 to 15 years. Now, younger people as well as retirees really desire to live downtown. I think it's wonderful.
Me
So I
too.
think we'll see more and more of those types of conversions, and I think there was an article in the Business Times that it's no longer going to be a central business district, but a central living district, if you will.
That's
which
true.
Which is a perfect, I think in order for the downtown to prosper, that needs to continue to occur.
I agree. It seems to be the direction that we're headed.
Right.
And we go through cycles in
Sure.
history. It wouldn't be the first time that the center of downtown was a residential district.
Yeah.
I mean, so
Right.
I'm the same age, and I've seen the same transformation,
Yeah.
and I was shocked by it at first, and now I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It brings life back to the downtown.
Yep. Well, before we leave this stage, so to speak, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about, we've talked about you as an author, talk a little bit about some of your speaking engagements, and then also to wrap up what you have planned in the near future.
Oh, great.
As you continue your journey here.
Well, thanks, Ed.
Yeah, you bet.
I mean, when I speak to groups, as I was saying to you before, so companies and associations, I like to talk about the inspirational stories of the people behind the buildings.
Mhm.
And that to me is something that helps bring an old building to life. I mean, you might look at it and it might be a grand structure, but if you don't really know any of the history of the people behind it, it can
Mhm.
sometimes, it doesn't have the power that it can when you know stories like I told you. There's another great one in Houston. There's a building called the Niels Esperson Building, and it was
Mhm.
built by the widow of a man, Niels, so Mellie Esperson. She and her husband had planned to build a skyscraper to celebrate their finally striking oil in Houston.
Mhm.
And then he passed away before they could realize their dream, so she took over the business and became this
Okay.
very influential businesswoman in Houston and built the tallest skyscraper in Texas, which is saying something.
Wow, it sure is. Yeah.
So, and then later she built a building named after her next door to her husband's building, so the Mellie and Niels Esperson building
Oh,
are
wow.
side by side, and these are 1920s and 1930s era. So I feel that can be, that adds, every one of these structures has that background behind it. So that's the thing I like to convey to people,
Sure.
either when I'm giving my corporate or business talks, or I also give occasional public tours of skyscraper rooftops here in
Okay.
Pittsburgh. So I'll be doing those. I have them on my website, which is Hauser Talks.
Excellent.
And
Yeah.
that's in June, July, and then I think September and October, I believe. So we go out on the
Fantastic.
weekend and do
Yeah.
that. That's a lot of fun. And so that's,
Yeah.
the next thing on the next project on my agenda
Yeah.
is are those tours. And I should also mention our Highrises project. Chris and my
Mhm.
Highrises project is currently being shown at the Chicago Architecture Center.
Oh, cool.
So that's going to be through September.
Good for
all,
you.
All
Yeah.
of our his art and my stories are on display. Big display
Yeah.
in Chicago, right there off the river. And we're giving a talk in June at the Art Deco Society of New York. So we're going to be going up to New York in June for that.
Excellent. Well, this has been fantastic. Yeah, we really appreciate your time. And, best of luck moving forward. What you're doing is, like I said, it's great. I know that in the process you're highlighting a lot of Pittsburgh's history, which we love. In the commercial real estate industry, a lot of these buildings are near and dear to our heart. So, but I think it transcends our industry, and it's fascinating stuff for a lot of people. So,
Oh,
yeah.
sure. I mean, commercial real estate, you have the good fortune of
I
getting to
know.
be close to some of these structures.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So again, this is Ed Lawrence with Colliers. I've been sitting here with Mark Hauser, author and speaker. And again, really appreciate your time. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Ed.
Take
My
care.
pleasure.
You bet.